in the United States. And my purpose in talking about religious freedom in the United States, it's not because I think we in the United States understand religious freedom better than other countries do. My purpose is there's a very interesting debate now in the United States about religious freedom. It's a very interesting debate about religious freedom, and it concerns this question about judges and legislators and the protection of religious freedom. And I simply want to use this lecture to introduce you to the debate because it's very easy for me to imagine. It's very easy for me to imagine that this debate or something very similar to this debate will be taking place in many other countries. Maybe in some countries it's already taking place, but in other countries it's easy for me to imagine that this debate will be taking place in the future. Okay? So it's a very difficult debate about law and about judges and about legislators, and it has a special importance for religious freedom. Religious freedom. Okay? So this is what I want to say. Probably most of you know that in the United States Constitution, we protect religious freedom. We protect religious freedom in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So the First Amendment of the Constitution, it protects what's called the free exercise of religion. The free exercise of religion. And if you look at the exact words of the First Amendment, the exact words are, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So what it means is Congress cannot make any law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Now, I just want to explain something historically that's important. The word in the original meaning, so it says Congress, and Congress, of course, Congress is the national legislature in the United States. It's the national legislature. And so we in the United States, we have 50 states, and we have a national legislature, and every state, of course, has its own legislature. Every state has its own legislature, and every state, we have a national constitution, every state has its own constitution. Okay? So in the United States, you actually have 51 constitutions. All right? You have the national constitution for the whole country, and you have each state has its own constitution. The reason now this is a little complicated, but I want to make it simple for you. So it says Congress shall make no law. And so in the 18th century, when the Constitution was written, in the 18th century, the First Amendment of the Constitution, protecting religious freedom, it was directed only against Congress. It was not directed against the states. Okay? But today, because of a process of legal development called incorporation, directed against the states. Not only the national government, but also the government of each state. So today, what this means is no state, no individual state can abridge or prohibit religious freedom. Okay? So the process, it happened at the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century. The process was called incorporation. It's taking individual rights in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and saying each state must respect these individual rights. Not only the national government, but every state. Okay? So that's all I want to say about that. Now, when we talk about religious freedom, generally, we are talking about two things. We're talking about ideas a person might have, and we're also talking about the way a person behaves. Okay? The way a person behaves. Now, when we talk about ideas, this is, I think, much simpler than talking about behavior, because it's hard to imagine how the state could control the way everyone thinks. Now, the state might try to control the way people think, yes, but it's hard to imagine that the state could succeed in controlling every thought of every person. Okay? So the state, for example, can say, so you look at Albania under communism. It was the most aggressively atheist communist state in the world. Maybe North Korea today but Albania under communism was extremely aggressively atheist, aggressively anti-religious. But I have some colleagues in New York who are Albanian, and they told me even during communism, some people still were religious. Of course, it was very dangerous for these people to behave in a religious way, to go to the church or to go to the mosque, because Albania has many Muslims, okay? But what my Albanian friends have told me is the government could not control our deepest beliefs. They tried to. They tried to make every person believe that religion is bad, all religion is superstition, and that everybody should just believe the Albanian Communist Party. But my friends, some of whom come from intellectual families, they said, of course, this was very difficult for the government, and in some families, very, of course, carefully, people said, well, we don't believe this. The parents, when the children became older, the parents would say, you know, we don't believe this. The parents would not say this to the children when they were very young because, you know, children, maybe they tell their teachers and maybe that creates a big problem for the parents. But when the children get older, in some of these families, the parents directly said to their children, so, you know, we are Christian or we are Muslim. We do not accept the atheism of the state, okay? So that's about belief. That's an important part of religious freedom. The more complicated part of religious freedom is action. Now, can somebody tell me why this is more complicated than belief? Why is action? Because many people, they think it's very simple. You believe things, and then if you are religious, then you go to the church or the mosque or the synagogue, and that's the whole story. But it's really more complicated than that. Why? Example? Can you give me an example?
For example, when you think something, you believe in something that's your own thing, which is within you. When you do something like, there are some religious rituals, for example, that can cause damage to the animals, for example, even to other people.
Okay, religious rituals that could cause damage to animals. What do you have in mind?
For example, some voodoo tradition, I think they perform rituals on animals. They kill them.
Yes, they sacrifice animals, right?
Drink blood.
Yes, they sacrifice animals. Okay. Now this is an interesting point. If I were a radical vegetarian, okay, then it would be easy for me to say this is very bad, right? But you know, most people in the West, they eat meat, right? And so probably they think maybe it's a little strange if people in a religion, if they are killing animals for religious purposes. But probably they're not going to say it's extremely bad. Or probably they're going to say maybe it's strange, maybe I do not want these people as my neighbors, but, you know, it's okay because, well, we eat meat. So if we eat meat, maybe it's okay for them to kill animals for sacrifice. But you're correct. This is where where religious freedom becomes more complicated because that's an interesting example. And I will discuss in more detail in a few minutes a Supreme Court case from the United States involving sacrifice of animals by a religious group. Other examples. Can somebody give me another example?
So here we write about vaccination.
Vaccination, yes. So do you know? Probably you know about this religion, Jehovah's Witnesses, yes? Mm-hmm. So how do you say this in Russian? Okay. So Jehovah's Witnesses, at least in the United States, and I think probably everywhere they are, they have some unusual ideas about medicine. Okay, they have some unusual ideas about medicine, and I do not understand completely where they receive these ideas. They say they all come from the Bible. Okay, but most Christians believe that the ideas of these Jehovah's Witnesses about medicine are unusual. Okay, so for example, in theory, a Jehovah's Witness, if he or she has a surgery, has an operation, in theory, they're not supposed to accept blood. Okay, so we call it a transfusion of blood. In theory, they are never supposed to accept blood from another human being. Okay? Now, in practice, it's interesting. In practice, so I know some doctors in the United States, and one doctor, he told me, he said, in theory, they will not accept blood, but in practice, they will. And it's a very, very interesting way how they tell the doctor, they say to the doctor, you understand my religious beliefs. And the doctor will say yes. And then the person, the Jehovah's Witness, will say, I want you to know this is very serious, but I also understand you strongly recommend that I have the surgery. And the doctor says yes. And so then the person says one more time, but you understand my religious beliefs. So what happens is, in the United States, Jehovah's Witnesses, if they are adults, many times they will have the surgery and they will receive the blood. But they will never directly say, give me the blood. They will just say to the doctor, you understand my religious beliefs. And the doctor says, yes, I understand. But it's like an indirect way to get the blood without directly saying, please give me the transfusion. Okay? Now, one other unusual idea of Jehovah's Witnesses at the beginning of the 20th century is they did not want their children in the United States to have any vaccinations against certain diseases, including smallpox. And they said, in the state of Massachusetts, they said, we do not want our children to receive the smallpox vaccination. And this was a very big controversy at the time, and this was a Supreme Court of the United States case, our national Supreme Court, Jacobsen versus Massachusetts. And what the Jehovah's Witnesses were saying was, we want the religious freedom to refuse the smallpox vaccination for our children. We believe we have the religious freedom, First Amendment of the Constitution, to refuse this vaccination for our children. We don't care about the other children. You know, if their parents want to give them the vaccination, that's okay. But we say we should have the religious freedom to refuse the vaccination. And what this is called in American law is a conduct exemption. It's an exemption from a law of general applicability. Okay? Now, by general applicability, I mean it's a universal law. It's a law for everyone. So in the state of Massachusetts, the law was every parent with a young child must bring that child to receive the smallpox vaccination. It's a universal law. Every child must receive this vaccination. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, they are asking for an exemption, a legal exemption on the basis of religious freedom. On the basis of religious freedom. And what you have in the cases that I list here, A, B, C, D, E, F, you have 5 big cases before our national Supreme Court about religious freedom and the request for a conduct exemption on the basis of religious freedom. On the basis of religious freedom. Now, I give you another example from history. In the United States, in general, the government has nothing to do with religion. In general, the government, it's not really involved in religion. The government, for example, never suggests to people, well, that they should go to church or that they should, search for a religion. The government never says anything like that. Okay? Sometimes a president in the United States will mention God, but it's all like with very minimal content. Do you understand? So the president will say, I will pray. I will pray for the American people. I will pray for peace for the world. I will pray to God for peace. But really it has no meaningful content. Now, of course, it's okay if a president goes to church. Nobody cares, right? That is, nobody will say the president should not go to church, because the mentality is, of course he has religious freedom. He's an American. If he wants to go to church, It's his choice. Okay? So really the government today, not just in the United States, of course, but in the West, it has nothing to do with religion. But when the Reformation began, and even during the Reformation, many states were very involved in religion. So one great controversy, so I mention this as a contrast, where we are today and where we were before. One great controversy during the Reformation was between Luther and Calvin and members of a new group in the Reformation who did not want their children to be baptized. Okay? So this is a group, today they are called, throughout the world, they are called Anabaptists. Anabaptists. Does anybody know what the Anabaptists believe? So I know there are Anabaptists in Russia and Ukraine, but they're still a very small group. But there was a great controversy between the leaders of the Reformation, Luther and Calvin, in this new group called the Anabaptists. Does anybody know what the controversy was about?
They think that we need to have a new baptizing because
Yes.
the baptizing which we have before this, it was not real baptizing.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So
in adult age.
in adult age, exactly. Anabaptist means in English re-baptized. So I think in Russian like pira, like the prefix Russian pira, like to do it again. So Anabaptist means re-baptized. And what they said was nobody should be a Christian unless the person wants to be a Christian freely. So nobody should become Christian, should join the Christian church unless it's a free choice. And they said the problem with baptism is babies are being baptized, and a baby, of course, cannot make a free choice. So they said against Luther and Calvin, no babies should be baptized. But at that time in Europe, the law said that if the parents are Christian, the children must be baptized. If the parents are Christian, the children must be baptized. And Luther and Calvin, of course, they criticized many things in the Catholic Church, but they liked this law. They liked this law, and the Anabaptist group, they said, we do not want to baptize our children. And Luther and Calvin said, this is a good law. It's important that the Christian family continue. And Luther and Calvin said, you must baptize your children. And they did not want to, and so Luther and Calvin persecuted them. There was a long period of persecution of Anabaptists, I think about 20 years. And then finally, Luther and Calvin understood, and their followers, they understood, these people are very serious about this. Under no circumstances. For them, it's a very important matter of principle. They will not baptize their children, even if we persecute them. Even if we persecute them. And so finally, they changed the law. And they said, okay, it's not an obligation. It's not an obligation. If the parents are Christian and if they want to baptize their children, they may. But if they don't want to, the state will not force any parents to baptize their children. And this is considered, in the West, this is considered a very important development for religious freedom. And it's easy to understand why. Because the state is giving parents much more freedom of choice regarding religion. Before this time, when the state is saying the parents, if they are Christian, they must baptize the children, the state has a big role in religion. Yes? After this, it's freedom of choice for the parents to baptize the children if they want. Okay? But today we are very far from this point. Yes, we're very far from this point. In most countries in Europe and the United States today, the government is not directly involved in religion. It has a very, very minimal role in religion. So the debates today about religious freedom in law are largely about behavior of individual men and women that is motivated by religion. Okay? So the behavior of individual men and women that is based on religion. So the Jehovah's Witness mother who does not want to give her child the smallpox vaccination The other examples I will describe briefly. So this first case that I list, Reynolds versus United States, 1890. So this involved the religious group in the United States, the Mormons. And I'm sure all of you know that, the most interesting idea of the Mormons is that the men can have several wives. In fact, that it's an obligation, or it was an obligation in the Mormon religion for men to have several wives. State, generally speaking, makes its own laws. Each state, so for example, in some states, I use this example with my students. I ask the question, so do you think it's a good idea? Should a person be allowed to marry his or her first cousin? Do you think this is a good idea?
First what?
First cousin. First cousin.
No.
Do you think this is a good idea? Why not? It's incest, okay, all right. And you probably also would say from genetic standpoint it's probably not good, okay. So in the United States, it's interesting. Most states have laws against marrying your first cousin. A few states permit it, a few states allow it, and the most interesting example, in my opinion, is the state of Indiana. Because in Indiana, you may marry your first cousin if both you and your first cousin are 60 years or older. Okay? Now why do they have that? It seems funny, but it's... No children, yes. It's the genetic matter, obviously. Yes? Okay? So in general, the law of marriage depends on the state in which you live in the United States. But when the United States government in the 19th century, when it was buying a lot of land, and before that land was organized into states, our National Congress was making the law for marriage for this land, right? So we call it federal territory. Federal territory. So the Mormons were living in federal territory, and Congress passed a law saying that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And the Mormons went to the federal territory. The Mormons began in the state of New York. And they're living in the state of New York, and their leader, he understands that the people in New York are strongly against their ideas. Because the leader says several things, and one thing that he says is each man should have several wives. And so the Mormons decide, as a religious group, they say, we will go to the West. The people here, they do not like us. We will have probably more freedom if we go to the federal territory in the West. And so they moved to the West, and it was necessary for the Congress, our national legislature, to make a law about marriage. And they said marriage is the union of one man and one woman. Well, in this case, Reynolds versus United States from 1890, this Mormon man, Reynolds, he said, I should have the religious freedom to have several wives because I am a Mormon, and this is what our religion teaches, that each man should, that God wants each man to have several wives. And so in this case, he is asking for an exemption from a general law, right? The general law says marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And he's saying, I want an exemption, like an exception, a special exception from this general law because my behavior is based on religion. This man Reynolds, he had several wives. I think 3 or 4. He had several wives, and maybe he was going to have more. And so he said, I want to be exempt from this general law. And in this case, 1890, the Supreme Court said, no, you don't get the exemption. Because what you believe is your own business. But your behavior is a different matter. And the Supreme Court said that from a philosophic standpoint, marriage obviously was the union of one man and one woman. Supreme Court also said that, this is interesting, if you want to understand why American women are so privileged, you will understand that it's because we have from the beginning of our country understood marriage to be the union of one man and one woman. We never in the United States, the Supreme Court said in this case, we never considered seriously this idea of polygamy. Never. So we are different from most countries in the world because always from the beginning we said one man and one woman, and this is good for women. It's not good for women, it's not fair if a man can have several wives. Okay? So in this was the first big case in American constitutional law about these exemptions based on religion. The second big case, in my opinion, was the Jacobsen case. So the Jehovah's Witness mother asks for the exemption from the smallpox vaccination for her child, and this time, again, the Supreme Court says, you don't get the exemption. And the reason the Supreme Court gave here is a little bit different. The Supreme Court said, well, if you don't give your child the smallpox vaccination, it's possible your child will get smallpox. It's possible your child will get smallpox, and then maybe other people will get smallpox as well, and maybe we will have a serious crisis, public health, a serious public health crisis. So and the Supreme Court said this also, the law is not against your religious group. It's a general law that applies to everyone. But we will not give you the exemption from the general law because it's a rational law. It's a good law, and it's meant to promote the health of the state, the health of the people living in the state of Massachusetts. Okay, so this is 1905. Then you go to this case, 1963. And this is where it becomes very interesting. In 1963, you have a case called Sherman versus Verner. Sherman versus Verner. And this case involved, again, a very small religion. It's a group of Christians who are called Seventh-day Adventists. Does anybody know anything about this group?
No, what they are, but what are their beliefs?
Okay, so this is the way in which they are different from almost all other Christian groups. So Seventh-day Adventists, for them, they borrowed many things from the Jewish religion. And so many things in the Jewish religion are the same for Seventh-day Adventists. So for example, they go to church on Saturday, not on Sunday. They will never go to church on Sunday, always they go on Saturday. And for them, on Saturday, it's like a day of rest, the way it is for Jewish people. So they will never work on a Saturday. And also, they do not eat some of the same foods that Jewish people do not eat. So never will they eat pork. Never will they eat pork. So when I was about 15 years old, I had my first job in the United States, and I worked in a restaurant. And one of the women who cooked there, she was a Seventh-day Adventist. And I did not understand this at all. She would never eat pork. She would never eat pork, even though she was cooking pork in the restaurant. She would never, and you know, she made jokes about it. She says, I will never eat it. And I'm 15 years old and I don't understand this at all. And only years later when I am in university and I read about this, I say, and never would she work on a Saturday. Never would she work on a Saturday. So this case, Sherman versus Verner, it involved a woman. It was about a woman who was a Seventh-day Adventist. And she lost her job. She worked at a factory and she lost her job. And she was getting, we call it unemployment benefits. So she's getting money for about 6 months because she lost her job. Okay, so we have this program in the United States. Each week that you are paid, you must pay a little bit of money, and it goes into this collection. So if you lose your job, you will get this money back for 6 months. You can receive this unemployment pay for 6 months. So this is interesting. She lost her job. She's working in a factory, and she's collecting this unemployment pay. And then another company offers her a job. Another company says, okay, we heard you're a good worker, and we want you to work in our factory. And she is offered the job, but she refuses. She does not accept the job because they tell her you must work on Saturday. You must work on Saturday. And she said, I cannot work on Saturday because it's my religion. And the factory said, well, our factory is closed on Sunday, but if you want to work here, you must work on Saturday. You must work from Monday to Saturday. we have a 6-day work week. You must work all 6 days. And this is where it's interesting. So she refused to accept this job. She did not take this job. And the state found out about this, and they stopped her unemployment benefits. So the state told her, you should have accepted this job, because the law says if you're offered a job and you are qualified for the job, you must accept it and your unemployment benefits will end. And she said, no, 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 for me, it's a very important religious matter. I should not be forced to accept a job that requires me to work on Saturday. And the state said, no, you were offered a job. This is the law. We are ending your unemployment benefits. And she protested, and she got a lawyer, and it was in the court system, and it went all the way to our national Supreme Court. And here's what's interesting, because in Reynolds, the first case, the Mormon case, and in Jacobsen, the exemptions are not granted. But in Sherman versus Verner, they give her an exemption. They give her an exemption. They said, yes, you should be allowed to collect unemployment benefits because your reason for rejecting this job was based on your religion. Okay? Then we go to this next case, Wisconsin versus Yoder. Wisconsin versus Yoder, and this involves another very small religious group called the Amish. Probably you know about this group. So who are the Amish? You've been to Wisconsin, yes?
Yes.
So you certainly know about the Amish.
They preserve a very traditional way of life.
Yes.
Of 18th century.
Yes, very, very traditional way of life. So the Amish are a member of this Anabaptist group that do not believe in baptizing children. Okay? But one thing that the Amish do is they have interesting ideas about technology, and they believe that many kinds of technology are bad for Christianity. So in the United States, Amish, they do not drive cars. They go around just in horses, okay? And most of them do not have electricity in their homes. They live a very simple life because they said this allows us to lead a more pure Christian life. It's a very simple life. Amish people are not rich. They believe that it's dangerous for Christians to think too much about money. So they live a very simple life, and there are many things in contemporary American life that they reject. Electricity, cars, MTV, things like this, okay? And one thing that's related to their way of life, so it's a very simple agricultural way of life. You know, they all live in villages. Obviously, if they are against cars and electricity, they're not going to be living in cities, right? So they live in the country. They live in the middle of the United States, and they are farmers. Almost all of them are farmers. And one thing that they also reject is education. Now, they don't reject education completely, but they want only a little bit of education. Because what they say is, for our religion, the most important thing is to be able to read the Bible. So the interesting thing is, everyone in their community can read the Bible. So they are literate. They are literate. They know how to read the Bible, but they don't read many books besides the Bible. The Bible, really, it's the only book that they read. They read books about the Bible, maybe they read some commentaries on the Bible, but they are not interested in artistic literature, newspapers, because it's against their way of life. So one thing that they said in the 20th century, is they said, we do not want our children to receive a regular education. We want our children to receive just a very, very basic education so that they can read. And then when they can read, we want our children to leave the schools. Because they said, if our children get more education, it has a bad influence on them. Okay? So, in this case, Wisconsin versus Yoder, they were against a Wisconsin law that said all children in the state must go to school until the age of 16. What they said is, we do not want our children to go to school past the age of, I think, 14, 8th grade. Okay? So they wanted their children to leave school after 8 years. After 8 years of school, and the state said you must go at least until you were 16 years old. So that's about 2 years of high school in the United States, at least 2 years of high school. And the state says no, everybody should have school until they are 16, and the Amish say no, we want our children to be free to leave school at the age of 14. And there is a protest. They protest against the state. And they also go to the Supreme Court, the National Supreme Court. And the surprise is, once again, they get the exemption. So the Supreme Court says, yes, your conduct is based on your religion. And it's true, it's a general law, but we will give you an exemption. We will give you an exemption from this general law. Okay, so if you look at this, there are 4 cases. So you have Reynolds. There was no exemption. Jacobsen, there was no exemption. And then in the late 20th century, Sherman versus Verner, in Wisconsin versus Yoder, there were exemptions. Okay? And then you get to as part of so you can eat it or you can smoke it. Okay? And yes, and the interesting thing is that he. Yeah, it's like cactus. Yeah, that's right. It comes from the cactus. Yeah, it comes from the cactus. It comes from the cactus. Okay. Yeah, it's some part of the cactus. It's like some liquid or some chemical in the cactus, and then you develop it in a certain way, and you have peyote, this hallucinogenic drug. Okay. Now here is the interesting thing about this man Smith. So Smith, he received a job. And his job was he was supposed to help people who were having addictions to narcotics. Okay, so what we say he's a drug counselor. He's a drug counselor. So people who maybe they're using drugs very seriously all the time, Smith, this man, he's supposed to help them quit. He's supposed to help them quit. And so he receives this job, and he is told, if you want this job, you must promise in writing, you must sign a contract that you will never use any drugs, that you will never use any drugs in your private life. And so he says, okay, I will sign the contract. And of course, he is a member of this Native American church, and regularly he is using this peyote. Regularly he's using this peyote, and so his boss learns that he is using peyote, and so immediately he loses his job. His boss fires him. Okay? His boss fires him, and he tries to do the same thing that Mrs. Sherbert does. He says, I want unemployment. Okay? I lost my job, and I lost my job only because of conduct based on my religion. And the boss said, no, you signed a contract. You promised that you would not use any drugs. So we have the contract. It was okay for you to lose your job. But he says, no, First Amendment, United States Constitution, I have religious freedom to use peyote. Okay? All right? Now this was 1990. This was the most important case about religious freedom in the United States, I think, in our history. I mean, this was an extremely important case, and even today, many people are still arguing about this case. Many lawyers and scholars are still arguing about this case because the Supreme Court, it surprised many people. The Supreme Court, they did not give him the exemption, and many people were surprised because they're looking at Sherbert versus Verner and Wisconsin versus Yoder, the 2 most recent cases, and they're saying, well, in the 2 most recent cases, the exemptions were given. Of course, in the 19th century, the exemption was not given to the Mormons, and at the beginning of the 20th century, the exemption was not given to the mother who was Jehovah's Witness, but in the 2 most recent cases, cases, the exemptions, the Supreme Court gave the exemption. But now, in Smith, the Supreme Court is not giving the exemption. Okay, so many scholars and lawyers were very surprised by this. And so the big question was, well, why? Why did Smith not get the exemption? And this, philosophically, this is, in my opinion, this is just fascinating. This is just very, very interesting philosophically what the Smith case, what it means. Especially if you think about all of the things that the court said about religious freedom. So if you look at the second page of the outline, I think it's your second page, yes? Okay. So, in the first two parts of the second page, part 3a and part 3b, I take sentences from the Smith ruling, the Smith decision, okay? And what it's saying in the first part is, what it's saying in the first part and the second part is really very important. Let me read that to you. If prohibiting the exercise of religion is not the purpose, but the incidental effect of a general law. Okay, so the way I might say this in Russian is that if it's just happening accidentally, like случайно, okay, if it's a consequence, like an accidental consequence of the operation of the law, and if the law is a general law for everyone, then it's not a violation of religious freedom. So you have a general law. The law is not going against specifically any religious group. So when the legislators, when they make the law, it's a law for everyone. It's a law that's supposed to be for the common good. And if it's not against a religious group, then what the Smith decision says is that it's not a violation of religious freedom because it's a general law. It's a general law. Does everybody understand this? Okay? So the important thing here is it a general law? Is it a general law? And when legislators in the United States, and I think in most countries, when legislators, when they make a law, when they introduce a law, they want to explain its purpose. Like, what is this for? Why are we doing this? So you look at the example of the smallpox vaccination, right? So that's obvious. It's for public health. It's to protect the health of all the people living in the state of Massachusetts. And so when you have a law against using peyote, you understand it's a similar law. It's so, people will be healthy because peyote, maybe it's a dangerous drug, right? Maybe it's a very dangerous drug for some people. They use it, and so you think somebody uses peyote and then they want to drive a car. They want to drive a car and they're hallucinating. They're seeing 10 stop signs instead of 1, right? You understand? And so they are dangerous if they are behind the wheel, if they're driving the car. So it's a general law. The law is not against the Native American church, but it has the accidental consequence of being a burden for members of this Native American church. But what Smith is saying is that it does not violate their religious rights because the law is a general law, and the law is not purposely going against that religion. Do you see this? Now, I want to tell you one other thing about the decision that's very important, very important. See, Smith, what he was trying to do, he wanted the Supreme Court to give the exemption. So he goes to the court and he says, give me the exemption. And the Supreme Court says, no, we will not. We will not. But when the Supreme Court said no to Smith, it said something else that is very important. The Supreme Court said, if you want the exemption, what you must do is go to the legislature in Oregon, in the state where you live, and you must ask the legislature to create an exemption for you. You must ask the legislature to create the exemption for you. Now, Smith said this. Smith said, well, I belong to a very, very small religion. I belong to a very small religion, and most people in the legislature, the legislators, they do not know anything about my religion. And maybe I can try to teach them about my religion, but it's a very small religion, so my religion will not have any influence on the legislature. So Smith said, I do not think the legislature will give my religion the exemption. So that's why I want you, the court, to give the exemption to me. But the court said, no, we will not do this. You go to the legislature. And Smith said, it will be very difficult, maybe impossible, for me to get the legislature to give me the exemption. But in Smith, the Supreme Court also said that many legislatures give many exemptions for religious reasons. Okay? So I give you a famous example from American history. So at the end of the 19th century, in the United States, we have many immigrants from Europe, right? Many immigrants from Europe, especially from Catholic countries. Italy, Poland, okay, and other Catholic countries. Ireland, okay? So what's interesting about the Catholic religion and what we're discussing? Something very interesting about the Catholic religion and this subject. Anybody know why? So the Catholics, when they arrived in the United States, especially in New York, because many of them courts categorically, безусловно, they should not give exemptions. And the interesting question is why? Why do you think in the Smith case the court said no court should be giving exemptions? So what the court is saying in Smith was really that Sherman versus Verner and Wisconsin versus Yoder, these two other cases, they were wrong. In Smith, the court is saying indirectly, well, we made a mistake in these two other cases. Yeah, so the question would be, why would the court in Smith say courts should never give exemptions?
Well, one of the possible answers to this question is that we deal here with another interpretive strategy. Yes, and we know Antonin Scalia's textualism, new textualism.
You know it very good. Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and this principle duradex, sedilex. Yes, and as far as I know, Antonin Scalia has much influence upon other judges in the Supreme Court and on the lawyer society inside the United States, and he is his influence, I think, is
yes, he has a lot, but he gives a reason. He gives a reason when he says courts should never give these exemptions. It's like a philosophic. It's a legal and philosophic reason.
Maybe I miss it. It's for people to legislate the law of their lands.
He says, yeah,
he's courts to decide.
Yes, he says it's a matter of principle. He says it's a matter of principle, and he says it's okay for legislatures to give the exemption, but courts should not. Because why?
It's of people, not the judges.
Yeah, but why? Because some people say, well, judges, what's the problem? Judges should be allowed to give exemptions too. But Scalia says, so this is his phrase. Did I write it down?
Who should give them?
3C. Scalia says, if you let judges give exemptions, you are inviting anarchy. Why does he say that? Do you know?
Because judges have their own opinions, for example. They all.
Can you give me an example? Can you give me an example why Scalia believes that this is inviting anarchy?
Because there could be another judgments of the court concerning another examples in practice and these judges would be contradicting in each other.
It may,
and there will be anarchy not only in law but in judicial practice.
Okay, good. What else? There's a little bit more. There's one other.
Scalia has his particular insight on democracy, and he thinks that the people elect government, yeah, but they not elect judges, and that is Congress who has to say what law, to adopt the law is the
Make the
Congress.
laws, yes.
Yes, lawmaking is for Congress, not for judges, and judges may the only thing judges
Supposed to interpret.
yeah.
They're supposed to interpret.
Only supposed to interpret, but not making. And his restriction upon official interpretation of laws is that we must use plain meaning rule.
Yes. Okay. But okay. Good. Can you guess? There's one other thing. Nobody has guessed it so far.
well, maybe I missed it again, but religion involves very fundamental things, like right to life, for example, or right to death, if somebody there is something. And for example, there was a case in California when people voted out of the office a judge because she was prejudicial to the death penalty. So the law says this is a death penalty we have in California, but she voted numerously in her previous decisions that she would vote
Against it.
against it.
Okay,
So the
that's-
people went against this.
Right. That's interesting. That's not what I'm looking for. So this is what Scalia means. I explain it. This is obscure. It's not easy to guess this, right? But you're all very educated people, so probably you don't think this way. I think also it means you're very honest people, okay? Because you cannot imagine this, right? So it's like a good thing. Maybe you did not think of this. So this is what he means when he says if judges can give exemptions, they are inviting anarchy. What he worries about, he worries very much about this, is the possibility that people will be insincere in saying that their behavior is based on religion. Okay? So imagine this. So there's somebody who wants to smoke peyote. Okay? So it's against the law.
Hippie will go into the community.
Exactly. And the person will say, look, this is based on my religion. I know there's a general law against smoking peyote in this state, but I'm a member of the Native American Church and I want the exemption. Scalia is saying it will be very easy for judges to be fooled by people who are being insincere in their profession of religion. Okay? So peyote is a good example. There's another example from a case in California. So this is interesting. I tell you this quickly. So it's a man and a woman, and they belong to some new church. And it's a church where if you want to become a member, first of all, you can only become a member of the church if you are a man. So there are some women in the church, but new members must be men, and only men. Okay, so the only women who are members of the church are already in the church, so no new women will be allowed as members of the church. Okay, so it's only men from now into the future that can become members. Okay, and so if you are a man and you want to be a member of this church, you must do two things. First, you must pay an initiation fee, $500, okay? And then the second thing you must do is you must have an intimate meeting with one of the women in the church who is priestess, okay? So the women who are already in the church, they are not just regular members, but they are priestesses. So if a man now wants to join the church, he pays $500, and he must have an intimate relationship, meaning sexual relationship, with the women in the church who are priestesses. Okay? So what of course is this? What is this?
It's not religion.
It's not. What is it then?
Prostitution.
It's prostitution. Exactly. It's prostitution disguised as religion. Okay? It's prostitution disguised as religion. And this was a case. This was a real case. This was not this was before the Smith case. It was in California. It was a state court in California. And the interesting thing is the judge believed that this was a sincere religion, right? Because the police, they arrested this man. They said, you are running prostitution ring. And the man said, I know it seems like a prostitution ring, but really it's a sincere religion. It's a sincere religion. You know, we believe the women have special powers, and men who join the church, the only way that they will become smarter and philosophically more enlightened is if they have intimate meeting with one of the women in the church who is a priest.
But was really prostitution only from the one point of view of some kind of moral? Because we know in the previous history it was a real ritual in many of religion, not really.
Yes.
Not really prostitution in some aspects.
Yes. Okay. Good. I accept that. I accept that. The point is this: what Scalia is saying, what the Justice Scalia in the Smith case is saying, is it is very easy to imagine if courts give exemptions that people will go regularly before the judge and they will be insincere or dishonest in saying that their behavior and saying that their conduct is based on religion. And they will try to avoid many general laws. And Scalia said that this would give the judge tremendous power. Tremendous power. And he wants to say the only part of the government that should give the exemptions is the legislature. Because the legislature has many people in it, and the religions that will go to the legislature and get the exemptions, they are real religions. They are not fraudulent religions, because they will get the exemption from the legislature only if the legislature knows that a lot of people belong to this religion. So it's like we say a mainstream religion. A very, very small religion we call a fringe religion, right? So like Native American Church. I am not against this Native American Church. I don't know so much about it, but it's such a small religion, some people might say it's a fringe religion, okay? And of course, and we see this often in the United States, you know, people do many, many things just for money, right? So people will invent religions for money. And they will try to attract new members, and they will say, we are the leaders of this new church or this new religion, and we want you to give us money, to support us. And of course, sometimes it's a completely dishonest enterprise. You understand? It's completely dishonest. And sometimes, probably you know about this, you know, it ends in tragedy. So there was this man, this American man, Jim Jones. Jim Jones. You know about this man, Jim Jones, yes?
Solar temples.
Jim Jones was the man, he was in California. He had his religion in California, and then they went to Guyana. They went to Guyana in Central America, and he was a fraud, and he was committing crimes. He was, you know, having sexual relations with all the women, and they were going to arrest him. And so what he did, this is I think 1979, he told all the people in his group that they must be willing to die, and the leaders of the religion, they put poison in the drinks of all the people in the religion. So approximately 250 people died.
There was a documentary about
Yeah, it's a very, very sad documentary about this. So when Scalia says if courts give the exemptions, they are going to invite anarchy, he means that some people will use religion for dishonest and, you know, very bad purposes, making money, trying to avoid general laws. Okay? So the question is, the philosophical question, I conclude with this. The philosophical question is this good? Is this good? Because there are many groups of people in the world that will seek exemptions from general laws based on their religion. So, for example, many people, men, will not want to be a soldier because of religious reasons. Okay? And so the big philosophic, legal question is, well, who should give the exemptions? Now, I think everyone believes it's okay for legislatures to give the exemptions, right? Everyone believes that. Legislatures, if they want, they can make an exception. So you have all these Catholic boys and girls in New York in the 19th century, and the legislature says, obviously we don't want to be arresting all these Catholic boys and girls when they were at church, so we give all of them an exemption. You know, the general law against young people drinking alcohol, the general law is still in force. It's still a good law, but we make an exception for Catholic boys and girls when they're at church. Okay? So everybody believes it's okay for the legislature to give the exemption. But the interesting question is, should courts ever be allowed to give the exemptions? Should they be allowed in any circumstance to give the exemption? Scalia says no. Justice Scalia, in the Smith case, he says no. Courts should not give exemptions. But the debate after the Smith case, and during the Smith case, because 4 of the justices, they disagreed. So it was a 5-4 decision, 5-4 vote, and there were 4 dissenting justices. They said sometimes courts should be allowed to give exemptions. And it's 3A, the compelling interest test, that courts can give exemptions unless the state has a compelling interest against the exemption. Okay? So I conclude there, and maybe you have some questions or you want to talk a bit more. Yes?
So there are some questions, but I'll only say my position. I think only Supreme Court.
They have very high opinion of themselves. They have very high opinion of themselves and their intellects. So atheist says, I know that there is no God. I know that there is no God. It's different from, you know this word agnostic, right? So agnostic says, I don't know, maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't a God. But atheist, it's stronger. Stronger. There's no God. I don't believe in God. I don't think it's possible that a God exists. So Americans, I think this seems arrogant to them for somebody to be an atheist.
They are not Christians, but they believe in God. It's an interesting situation. They don't know in what God they believe.
Yes, it's a good point. It's a good point. I think you know, Russian writer Nabokov, when he lived in the United States, I think he once said, it's impossible to imagine the United States having an atheist as a president. I think he's the first person who said that.
What about the, I don't know whether we have some time, but what about legalizing gay marriages?
So I talk about that in my next lecture. So, isn't that exciting? As I talk about that in my So I tell you one other thing about Smith. If you look at the end of the outline, I mentioned 3D. I mentioned one other case. And it refers to your example about animal sacrifice. So this is this case called Church of the Lukemi Babaluaye versus City of Hialeah. So Hialeah is a city in Florida. In this Church of the Lukemi Babaluaye, so the religion they practice is called Santeria. Does anybody know anything about Santeria? So it's a form of Christianity that comes from the Caribbean. And it involves a little bit of voodoo, and it involves a lot of animal sacrifice. So they're always sacrificing animals. Okay? And, you know, many people from the Caribbean, they now live in Florida. A lot of people from Cuba, for example, they left Cuba, they live in Florida. And so you have Santeria is practiced, I think, in several countries in the Caribbean, including Cuba. And there are even some people in Brazil that practice Santeria. So many of them are living in Florida now. And there is a city in Florida, it's not such a big city, it's called Hialeah. And so in the 1980s, some people who practiced Santeria, they moved to Hialeah. And almost as soon as they moved to the city, their neighbors started to notice, well, it's like they're always killing goats and dogs and little animals, rabbits, and they're doing this in their backyard, right? It's like they have the house, and in the backyard, constantly killing these animals, and then doing strange things with them. Bringing them into the house, and then they're in the dead animals are in the house for a few days, and then the next thing you know, there are dead animals in the trash. Because we bring our trash to the street, to the edge of the street, and then they collect the trash once a week, right? And so the neighbors, they're seeing these dead animals being in the backyard, and then they're seeing them in the front yard for the trash collectors to take away. And the neighbors immediately, they have a very negative reaction to this. So what happened? So city of Hialeah, immediately they passed these laws against sacrificing animals, and generally against cruelty to animals. Okay? Against cruelty to animals. And the people in Hialeah who practice Santeria, they say this is discrimination. They want us to leave the city. They pass these laws against cruelty to animals, and they're going to arrest us. They're going to arrest all of us. And we know that they pass these laws against us just because they do not like our religion. And so the Santeria people in Hialeah, they go to court. They go to court, and this case too also goes before our National Supreme Court. And in this case, the Supreme Court said that the members of Santeria in Hialeah, they can still practice their religion, because all of these laws that were passed, they were directed against only the members of Santeria. You understand? So these laws, they never existed before the Santeria people moved to Hialeah. And if you look at the content of the laws, it's obvious they are completely against the city, the Santeria people in the city. It's not you understand, it's not a general law. It's not a general law that was meant to promote, say, for example, public health or public safety. It was just a law that was passed against the members of this one religion. So here, Supreme Court says to the city, these laws are unconstitutional. The members of Santeria, they can continue to sacrifice these animals. Because, people in Hialeah, some of them, they have little farms, they kill animals themselves, they eat the meat. So Supreme Court is saying this is just a law or a group of laws against the Santeria religion. Okay? So you have this case after Smith, but this case it's different from Smith. You understand? It's different from Smith because Smith involved a general law. Hialeah involves a specific law that was discovered to be against this one religion. Okay? So I say that just to make the situation clearer. And my last point, what other countries might learn from the Smith controversy? Well, it's the big question. It's the big question. Legislatures can give exemptions. Everybody seems to agree that's okay for the legislature to give exemptions. So I do not know. In Russia and Ukraine, for example, there are religious people, religious men who do not want to be soldiers, right? And probably the legislature in Russia and Ukraine, probably they will give exemptions. And probably they will say, okay, you will not be a soldier, but you must serve the state for several years in another way, right? Okay. So everybody says the legislature can give the exemption. But the very interesting question is, if the legislature does not give the exemption, should courts sometimes give exemptions? And if that's the general answer, well then can you say what the circumstances are if courts are ever going to give the exemption? And if you want to know my opinion, I agree with Scalia in the Smith case. I think Scalia, it's a very, very difficult thing to contemplate, but I think if courts start to give exemptions, really it could be very bad. Because then people, and I speak as an American here, right? I speak as an American, and I know people sometimes they invent religions for money, and people are sometimes very insincere about their religion. So it's easy for me in the United States to imagine many people would try to deceive. Как на русском? Обманывать. Yeah, so обманывать the judge by using religion. Saying, okay, I want to smoke peyote because I belong to the Native American church. In fact, I am just a hippie and, you know, I don't believe in any religion. So, okay, I conclude there. Thank you.